A cordial greeting. Today is Friday, May 26, 2023. This is meteorologist Ruben Garcia speaking. In today's video, I would like to talk about NOAA's forecast regarding the cyclonic activity anticipated for the 2023 hurricane season, which begins next Thursday in the Atlantic region. So, 1 week before the official start of the hurricane season, NOAA has released its official forecast. In this video, we will analyze NOAA's forecast and discuss the factors that led to this prediction. In general, NOAA is predicting a hurricane season close to normal, with a 40% chance that the cyclonic activity will resemble the average of the last 30 years. However, it is important to note that there is a 30% chance of it being more active than normal and a 30% chance of it being less active than normal. When we analyze these percentages, we can see that an average hurricane season is expected, but there is still some uncertainty, and there are factors that could make the season less active. One specific factor is the developing El Niño phenomenon in the Pacific, which could potentially make the season less active. On the other hand, the current warm ocean temperatures in the tropical Atlantic region could make the season slightly more active than normal. In terms of numbers, NOAA is forecasting 12 to 17 tropical storms, 5 to 9 hurricanes, and 1 to 4 major hurricanes, categories 3, 4, or 5. When comparing these numbers to the average of the last 30 years, which is 14 tropical storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes, we can see that NOAA's forecast aligns with the cyclonic activity observed in the Atlantic over the past 30 years. I also want to mention that NOAA's forecast is quite similar to the forecast from the University of Colorado, which predicted 13 storms, 6 hurricanes, and 2 intense hurricanes. Now let's discuss the factors that led NOAA to forecast a near-normal hurricane season. The main reason for this forecast is the imminent development of the El Niño phenomenon in the Pacific. We continue to observe warming sea surface temperatures in the Niño 3.4 region, and it is very likely that we will have El Niño during the months of June or July. El Niño tends to suppress cyclonic activity in the Atlantic by causing stronger wind shear than usual in the Caribbean region. This usually results in less cyclonic activity than usual. However, this year we have an interesting factor that we haven't seen in recent years. Typically, when El Niño occurs in the Pacific, the waters in the tropical Atlantic tend to be slightly cooler than usual. But this year, we have the opposite situation, where the Atlantic has warm sea surface temperatures for this time of year. We can clearly see in the next image that the subtropical and tropical Atlantic region is experiencing very warm temperatures for this time. Historically, from 1879 to 2022, hurricane seasons that experienced El Niño in the Pacific have been less active than usual in the Atlantic region, specifically in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean, due to the development of stronger wind shear in this area. But it is very important to note that the subtropical Atlantic region, the tropical Atlantic, and just off the west coast of Africa usually have little influence from the El Niño phenomenon. Therefore, it is possible that the cyclonic activity this year will focus on this area, as we have discussed in recent videos. We can also observe this relationship between El Niño and reduced cyclonic activity in the image, where it is clear that during the peak of the season, El Niño has an inverse correlation, meaning that El Niño usually results in below normal cyclonic activity. However, when we look at this image, we can see that when the Caribbean and the tropical Atlantic have warm waters, there is usually a direct correlation, meaning that warm waters often lead to increased cyclonic activity. So, the big question once again is whether El Niño will dominate or the conditions caused by the warm waters of the Atlantic. That is the key question, and that is why I believe NOAA responsibly published a forecast close to normal, while indicating that there is still a good chance that the season could be even less active or more active than usual. The most likely scenario is a forecast for a hurricane season close to normal based on my experience. I understand that this hurricane season should be slightly more active than usual, but not necessarily for the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico regions. Instead, the activity is likely to be focused in the tropical and subtropical Atlantic region. As I mentioned before, historically, when El Niño develops in the Pacific, the waters in the tropical Atlantic tend to be cooler than usual. However, this year is different. When we look at similar historical years, such as 1877, 1896, 1899, 1965, and 1969, we can see that in these seasons, despite the presence of El Niño in the Pacific, the tropical Atlantic was warmer than usual. So let's analyze how cyclonic activity behaved during these years, especially considering that the forecasts from the best global models predict that the peak of the season will have warmer waters in the Caribbean and the presence of El Niño, as well as cooler waters than usual southwest of the United States. This closely resembles what was observed on average during these years, which we could call analog years. Interestingly, when we examine how cyclonic activity behaved during these years, we can see that the Atlantic was indeed slightly more active than normal, and cyclonic activity in general focused on the northeast region of the Gulf of Mexico, the subtropical Atlantic, and the tropical Atlantic. However, note that the Caribbean and the western Gulf of Mexico experienced less cyclonic activity than usual. Therefore, in my opinion and the opinion of other meteorologists, it is likely that this year cyclonic activity is concentrated in this Atlantic region, and we could have a hurricane season close to normal or slightly more active than usual. Additionally, we can analyze the same trend in the following graph, where we see that in years when the Atlantic has been warm but we also have El Niño in the Pacific, we have experienced different scenarios. Sometimes we have had hurricane seasons that are more active than usual, as indicated by the red color, but we have also had seasons that are close to or within the normal range. This uncertainty gives us much to consider. However, we will be closely monitoring the strength of the development of El Niño because, judging by this graph, if El Niño becomes a strong phenomenon according to historical records, cyclonic activity is indeed suppressed, and we could end up with a less active season. Therefore, I believe that one of the most important factors to observe this year is whether El Niño becomes a strong phenomenon or remains weak or moderate, as this could influence whether we observe cyclonic activity close to or above normal levels. These opposite effects that we observe in El Niño and Atlantic temperatures are already being taken into consideration in some forecasts from the best global models. For example, here we have the forecast from the European model for the peak of the season, showing how potential velocity anomalies could behave. We see green areas that indicate instability and promote upward motion towards higher levels of the atmosphere. In this forecast, we can observe two atmospheric cells that are possibly competing for the peak of the season. The first is over the eastern Pacific region due to El Niño, which promotes cyclonic activity in that region. However, the African monsoon trough could be more active than usual, and tropical waves could be stronger during this year. So, we clearly see the competition between these two factors, the warm Atlantic temperatures and a more active African monsoon season versus higher cyclonic activity than usual in the eastern Pacific region. These factors could be competing to focus cyclonic activity in either the eastern Pacific or the Atlantic. In fact, in the precipitation anomalies forecast between the European model and the United Kingdom model, we anticipate above normal precipitation anomalies across the tropical and subtropical Atlantic regions. This aligns well with our previous discussion that cyclonic activity is likely focusing in this Atlantic region. Additionally, the eastern United States and some areas of the Gulf of Mexico may experience more rainfall than usual. However, specifically in the Caribbean and certain sectors of the Gulf of Mexico, cyclonic activity is expected to be lower than normal due to the wind shear caused by El Niño. Well, that's all for today's video. Subscribe to my channel by clicking on the red button below the video that says subscribe, and don't forget to click the bell icon to receive notifications when I upload new content. I invite you to stay tuned to hurricane info in the coming weeks and throughout the rest of the season to stay informed about any cyclonic activity. Soon, I will also be recording a video to discuss the forecast from NOAA for the Eastern Pacific region. Goodbye for now.